Well, hello, Mr. David Hike.
Hello, Guy. Nice to meet you. Nice to talk to you.
Yeah, how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, it's a great day in England. But apart from that, all good.
Well, in Israel is also a great day. We have here a winter came, but not a lot of rain. Because all the chemtrails and all the stuff that we are going to talk about. Because the subject that we are going to talk about, it's regarding to every aspect in our life, unfortunately.
Okay.
First I want to tell to the audience in Israel, אנחנו מדברים עם, אתם בתוכנית בדלתיים פתוחות בערוץ We Act, אנחנו מדברים עם דיוויד הייק. דיוויד הייק הוא חוקר מזה 35 שנה את כל נושא השליטה העולמית בבני אדם וכל הדרכים שבה, ועכשיו אנחנו בשיחה אישית. Okay, so I'm back to you in English. Tell me, David, from what from what I know you and we talk, I know that many people confused. They think that you are having a problem with Israeli people, and I all the time explain to them, all maybe 2 years that I'm having this show. I say to them, listen, it's not that David Icke is against Israel. There is Zionists, there is Judaism, and there is Israel. Israel is the people, and the Zionist is organization, and the Judaism is religion, but also organization. Me, David, and all the people that care about people, they are not against people. They are against all those organizations that try to control, unfortunately, control to people. So you don't have nothing against Israeli people. I mean, I'm Israeli and we know each other very well. We are friends, I can say that, and you don't have any problem with me.
Uh, what you described, Guy, is how a few people control the many. They divide and rule the many and put them in conflict with each other, put them in fear of each other,
Mhm.
and they use that to play them off against each other. So the mass of the people going under different labels, whether it's Jewish or Muslim or whatever, are played off against each other. So they are so busy
Mhm.
uh, in conflict with each other, being frightened of each other, and looking therefore to their leadership to protect them, that this situation allows a few people to control the many in every single country. And what I'm saying is I'm challenging injustice, I'm challenging the manipulation of events in the world, no matter who's affected and no matter where it is. I'm coming from the point of view that this world should be a place where people are treated equally, no matter what their racial background, their religious beliefs, or their culture. They should be respected, and that we should live in a world of freedom where everyone is allowed to speak their truth and not have it censored by someone else. Overwhelmingly, it's what censorship's all about, out of their own self-interest. And what's happened with me is that to try to discredit me and to try to demonize me, and thus to stop my criticisms of the far-right regime
Mhm.
in Israel, the same criticisms I would make of the far-right regime anywhere else, or the far left tyranny anywhere else. Anything that is treating people unequally and seeking to impose its will on others, I will challenge. I don't care what the religious background is, what the cultural background is. I'm not bothered. It's the injustice, the unfairness, and the manipulation that I'm interested in. But what happens is, and I'm going to be dead straight about this, the Israeli government has a protection racket around the world, and that protection racket is nothing whatsoever to do with protecting Jewish people from discrimination. It's to do with protecting the far-right regime in Israel from criticism. So how they do that is to equate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, as they call it. And this is why there has been this, I say, outrageous expansion of the definition of anti-Semitism, which is being implemented around the world, that includes criticism of Israel. That is, as a definition of anti-Semitism, that is nothing whatsoever to do with protecting Jewish people from discrimination. It's to do with protecting Israel from criticism, the Israeli government from criticism, and the Israeli military from criticism, by equating that criticism with being anti-Jewish. You know, what a lot of people, Guy, around the world, and you will know this far better than me, but I can speak from being outside of Israel. What doesn't get out to the world population is the number of people in Israel, Jewish people in Israel, who are in a state of poverty, deprivation, injustice, who are campaigning against and protesting against the very current government that I criticize. This doesn't get out because this protection racket on behalf of the Israeli government, masquerading as anti-Semitism, has to equate, or seeks to equate, all Jewish people with them. So you hear Netanyahu or whoever replaces him coming out with, I speak on behalf of Jewish people. No, you don't. It's this idea that all Jewish people are the same, all Jewish people think the same, believe the same. No, they don't. Quite demonstrably, like every other community, they have a great diversity of view of the way they see the world. But this protection racket wants the world to believe that they all think like the purveyors of the protection racket, which is a fundamental misrepresentation of Jewish people. So what I'm saying is, instead of looking at the leadership and seeing that as your focus of attention, let's look at injustice and let's look at unfairness. And on that basis, those who are campaigning against the injustice of so many Jewish people in Israel with regard to their treatment by the government, then look at the Palestinians and their injustice. Let the injustice unite us and not let these edifices of self-styled, self-appointed leaders dictate to us in a way that divides and rule. What about the people sleeping in the streets in America and sleeping in tent cities? What about the people sleeping in the streets in Britain and in France and around the world? So this is the level, surely, that we as a human race and as a consciousness beyond the human level of us, the infinite level of us, we should surely be coming together in unity, united against communal injustice by elites upon the general population, and not letting labels divide us, not self-identifying all the time with the labels that we give ourselves and people give us, but actually seeing beyond it, and looking in common cause and common empathy between all people suffering injustice, because that's where I'm coming from. I'm a guy they call a white guy, and because I was born on a piece of land called Britain, they call me British. But I couldn't care less if I was Jewish or Syrian or American or South African. It wouldn't matter to me. This is just a vehicle, this body is just a vehicle for my consciousness to experience this reality. And it's the same, of course, with everyone else. And once we get pulled into these labels, I am this, I am that, then you create an isolation perception, which is then played off against other isolations of perception. So within Israel, for instance, as within every other country, you will have one income bracket played off against another income bracket, and the powerful income bracket imposing its will on the lower income bracket. This happens in every country, but we don't see this in terms of Israel, because all we hear to get for the world population to get a perception of Israel is the constant mantra of the leadership claiming to speak for everybody. You look at all these billions that are given to Israel every year by the American government, and people say, "Oh, Israel gets all that money." Oh, yeah, it does, but the population doesn't get it.
Correct. You know, let's talk about anti-Semitism. Okay, Israel, the government of Israel is saying, okay, we're going to take and sue and close doors of Israel to those who talk bad about Israel. Okay, super, no problem. But what the government of Israel is doing, and maybe this is good also for your audience and the audience to all over the world. You know, the Holocaust in Second World War, finished in 1945. Okay, and in 1948, Israel became a country. Okay, we are now in 2019, dear David. And you have here survivors of the Holocaust that don't have what to eat. You have, and you know this, we talked about this last time when we talked together, what happened with the family in the family court in Israel. They separate fathers from kids. I mean, they are the government and the judges, all the aspects of the family court and court, you know, in general, you know, the Supreme Court. They are breaking the Israelis. I mean, it's like the government, Israel himself, is against the Israelis, and we are shutting out, and we are doing protest, and they now erased all the people that have protest and say, oh, we have bad situation, please stop what you do. You understand? So Israel don't have right to talk about racism. You know, before 3 days, Israeli police shot an Israeli Ethiopian that he's black because he feel threat.
What we have, what you described.
I'm sorry that I was emotion, David, because
no, blimey, if anything deserves emotion, it's that.
Yeah.
What you've just described is how all elites operate. They create a situation where they control the country, they dictate events. Often they're dictating who is subject to law and who isn't. And the people that take the consequences of that are the general population, the largest number of people in a country. It happens everywhere. But what the protection racket wants to do is to paint a picture of Israel in which it is the permanent ongoing victim. And because it's a victim, it mustn't be criticized. And if anyone is behaving in a certain way and wants to stop criticism of it, then they can't be very confident that what they are doing will stand up to public scrutiny. What happens is, if you can win a debate, you have a debate. If you can't win a debate, and in terms of Israel, the Israeli government's treatment of Palestinians alone, it can't win the debate, then you shut it down. This is what's happening all over the world across many subjects, where you can't have an alternative opinion because either you are directly censored or you are subject to endless abuse for having a different opinion. Now, I am criticized for being an anti-Semite for doing nothing more than criticizing injustice. But what they do, this protection racket for the Israeli authorities and regime, is to equate that with anti-Semitism. Thus, you criticize any thing to do with Israel or anyone who happens to be Jewish, and immediately you're an anti-Semite, you must be silenced. As we sit here, Guy, there is an organization in Australia, it's called the Anti-Defamation Commission or something.
Yeah.
And it is approaching the Australian government and the immigration minister to have my visa removed, to stop me going on a series of talks in Australia in March. And be straight about this. The number of Jewish people in Australia is 0.4 of the population. That organization will not speak, although it claims to, for more than a fraction of that 0.4%. And yet it believes that it has the right to stop the entirety of the Australian population from hearing what they choose to hear and then making up their minds as they choose to receive it. Ironically, I wasn't even intending to talk about Israel or any related subject to Israel on this Australian tour, but it doesn't matter to these groups. I get this all over the place. You know, my son has tried now 70 venues for me to speak in Germany, but the same thing happens. These groups, this network of the protection racket, approach venues. They absolutely lie about what I'm going to say, and then the venue, under pressure, pulls the event. And if it doesn't, if it says no, we believe in freedom of speech, then it goes to the next stage, and these protection racket organizations, ultimately orchestrated out of the Israeli government, they then start telling the venue what consequences there will be. Don't, because suddenly, if you're letting this guy Icke speak, then you must be an anti-Semite. And this is the racket that goes on all over the world. Now, this is why it's important that people in Israel know this, because people in general are not discerning enough. What they hear is this ultra-Zionist extremist group, or this one or this one or that one, is trying to stop people speaking at a venue or something. And what they'll say is, in their mind, all Jewish people are like that. But they're not. What's happened, and this is the same in every country and every culture, you've got the people that dominate the microphones, the people that the self-styled we speak for the everyone, and they give a certain opinion which is then related by large numbers of people to be the opinion of everyone in that country or everyone in that group or culture. So when people get angry about seeing these protection racket groups seeking to silence people, and stop them having an ability to speak in public, and for the population to decide if they want to hear it, what that's doing is creating anti-Jewish feeling because of this lack of discernment, of not realizing that these microphone voices, these shrill microphone voices, are not actually speaking on behalf of large numbers of Jewish people. It's the same with every aspect of society. Where the microphones take on themselves, we're speaking for everybody, and people then think, well, everybody they claim to represent thinks like them, and they don't. And what we're seeing very clearly is this protection racket getting much more and more extreme, in the sense that this new definition that's being peddled around the world, and people intimidated often, like the British Labour Party recently, to accept it, that equates criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, gives a series of examples of what anti-Semitism is. And when you go through them, they are all examples designed to stop criticism of the ultra-Zionist, as I call it, elite, and including the far-right government of Israel currently. So you have something like, in effect, these examples reach the point of definition where to criticize a Jewish person for anything is anti-Semitic, and therefore you must be stopped from doing it. This is a protection racket to stop any criticism. So when I talk about George Soros, the multi-billionaire financier in America, who was, of course, born in Hungary. I talk about his Open Society foundations and how they're manipulating politics around the world on the back of his donations that run to like $32 billion so far. You can buy an awful lot of manipulation with that. Instead of saying, well, hold on a minute, let's look at what Soros is doing. Let's look at what this Open Society network is doing, and let's see if it stands up. No, you don't want that debate, because if you had that debate, what Soros is doing would be exposed, and that's the last thing they want. So you say you're only criticizing George Soros because he's Jewish. No, I'm criticizing George Soros because he's spending tens of billions of dollars manipulating events that should be democratically decided. That's
more than that, David.
I don't care if he's outer Mongolian.
More than that, you are so right. You are so right, because it's more than that, because George Soros make a foundation here in Israel called the New Foundation of Israel, and it's destroying, I can tell it loud, I say it loud, I say it all the time, George Soros, the foundation of George Soros in Israel is destroying Israel. In the court of family, they are making judges, they are making lawyers, they are making everything to tear Israel apart.
Well,
and I say it as an Israeli, David, as an Israeli.
Like I say, I'm not interested in someone's background, where they were born, what their religion is. I'm interested in what they do. And this expanded, outrageously expanded, someone's got to say it, definition of anti-Semitism is designed to stop exposure and criticism of behavior they do not want exposed. I mean, are we really saying, Guy, are we really saying that no Jewish people or no supporter of Zionism ever does anything deserving of criticism. Of course, that it would be crazy to say that, because you show me any race, any culture, any religious belief, any group of that kind, anywhere in the world, and within that group, I'll show you lovely people, I'll show you genuine people, compassionate people, I'll show you okay people, and I'll show you psychopaths and manipulators in every group. So therefore, once you start equating a form of racism, or in this case, what's called anti-Semitism, with criticism of someone on the basis of what they're doing, you equate that with racism. What you're saying is that you cannot criticize anyone who's Jewish, because no one who's Jewish is capable of deserving criticism, which is, again, ludicrous. Why should Jewish people be any different from any other culture? Nice people, genuine people, lovely people, okay people, psychopaths and manipulators. Of course, they're found in every walk of life. But this definition of anti-Semitism is designed specifically to stop criticism of Jewish people. But hold on, not the Jewish people in Israel who are protesting about their injustice and their economic challenges. Not them. That's what this definition of anti-Semitism and this protection racket network is all about. Not protecting criticism of them.
Yeah.
It's protecting criticism of the multi-billionaire political, financial elite that deserve scrutiny. It's to stop criticism and scrutiny of them. And I will not have it. I don't care what abuse is thrown at me, straight in one ear and out the other. It don't make any difference to me. I've been taking abuse for 30 bloody years. I think I could take a bit more and then some. Mm-hmm. Because someone has to say this. Because at the moment, what's happening is more and more people are being more and more intimidated into silence. Well, you can't say that. The British Labour Party had its backbone deleted when it caved to this pressure. And it means that more and more people are getting away with things that deserve public scrutiny, but don't get it because people fear being dubbed anti-Semitic. It's so blatant what's happening. And we've already talked, Guy, about the fact that in the wider world, what is happening to the Israeli general population in terms of their economic challenges is not being communicated and broadcast around the world on the scale it should be, so we can have some balanced view of what's going on in Israel, and that Netanyahu doesn't actually speak for everybody. They are being silenced too. The idea is not about silencing non-Jewish people. It's about silencing Jewish people as well. Do you know what I find the great irony? And I would think it would be a form of insanity, but they try it anyway, is when I see Jewish people around the world who are challenging the behavior of the Israeli government, and they are called anti-Semites.
Yeah.
Hello? What that tells you is it's not about protecting Jewish people from discrimination. It's about protecting this elite, which locks into the American elite, and the British elite, and the French elite, the German elite, and so on. It's protecting this elite from exposure, not only by non-Jewish people, but exposure and challenge by Jewish people. And this is why I say to Israelis, please put the labels down, right? I would be quite happy to be Jewish, me.
Yeah.
I would be quite happy to have been born in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem. It's just a body. It's just a way of experiencing this world. It's just another set of labels to me, another set of experiences. Put the labels down just for a second and open the heart, and let's have an empathetic connection between the abused Jewish people in Israel, the abused Palestinians, the abused homeless in America and Britain and France and everywhere else. And let's come together with hearts open in common cause against injustice and against the imposition by elites anywhere, whether it's Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Washington, or London. Then we take the power back from these elites, because one of the crucial areas that they must control is dividing and ruling the population. So Palestinians are divided against the Jewish general population. There's that division, there's that fear, there's that mistrust. And then you get other groups that are in the same way divided and ruled and turned in fear against each other. And anyone who can be manipulated into fear of something overwhelmingly looks outside of themselves for something or someone to protect them from what they fear. And that is usually these elites. So this is the game. You make the population frightened of survival, frightened of consequences, and then you say to that population, just do what we say, support us, support what we want, and we'll protect you from what you have been manipulated by us to fear. And right. This is happening all over the world. You go right back in history. Whenever anyone wants a war against another group, they first demonize the other group in the eyes of their group, and they make their group frightened of the other group in terms of they're going to come and get us. So we've got to go to war with these people. This has been happening throughout human history, and it's getting more and more blatant and more, well, I was going to say sophisticated, but the more it thinks it's getting sophisticated, the more obvious what they're doing becomes to anyone with half a brain on active duty. And so if the general population of Israel just came together with the general population of Palestine and in common cause, because we're all expressions of the same consciousness, points of attention in the same infinite state of awareness as everyone else, and the labels divide us and give us a false self-identity, which is the labels. I am this, I am that. We are all the same consciousness, having different experiences. Let's celebrate that diversity.
Yeah.
And not seek to have one group of labels impose its will on another group of labels, because that's how we got into this mess.
Well, fear and the creator do not occupy same square meter. So when you put fear, there is no God, there is no creator. And a lot of people that knew that I'm going to do the interview with you to show to everybody in Israel, they said, "Oh, why you don't scare? You don't." I said, "This is why we opened this channel that calls We Act, because we act for the togetherness. We act for not collaboration anymore with a system, any system that can affect bad on one person. If the system affect or hurt one person or not give justice to one person, it's enough to close this system."
Absolutely. I mean, you're a Jewish man sitting in Israel. I'm a non-Jewish man sitting in England. What is the difference between us? Nothing.
Nothing.
What is the difference that appears to be between us? And that is that you are Jewish and I am not. Yeah. But that's an illusion. It's just a label. Therefore, when we come together in mutual empathy, then the way you see justice, the way I see justice, the kind of world we'd like to live in, that you see and I see, are exactly the same, because the labels have gone. We're not talking to each other, are we? That you are Jewish and I am not. We're talking as two expressions of consciousness having an interaction
Yeah.
with the labels put aside. And thus, when they're gone, all the divisions and the fault lines between us have gone.
And a
If,
lot of respect.
if only people could see it, yes, respect. So, what people want and demand for themselves must surely be what they demand for everyone else. Otherwise, why would you demand something better for you than someone else? So, if Israelis, and they have every right to, and so they should, demand freedom, freedom of expression, freedom of opportunity, then why should that be denied another group of people just because they have a different label?
Correct.
Why should everyone be treated the same? Why shouldn't the violent aspect of the Palestinian community be treated the same as the violent aspect of the Israeli community?
Correct.
Why should they be treated the same? Why should someone be a terrorist for throwing stones and not be a terrorist for dropping state-of-the-art weapons on a civilian population in Gaza? Why should one be treated in one way and one treated in the other? If we believe in a world where everyone is perceived to be equal in terms of their rights, in terms of their the way that they are allowed to live their lives, and equal in terms of the judgment of their actions, then surely people dropping state-of-the-art weapons on civilian areas of Gaza must be terrorists. It's terrorism. What is terrorism? It's terrorizing people for a political end.
Correct.
What is happening to the Palestinians except that they are being terrorized for a political end? And if some Israelis are also being terrorized in different ways for a political end, then whoever's doing it is also a terrorist, no matter what the color of their skin or their culture or their background or their religious belief.
Now you have now you have the big joke, David, because this channel, what I'm doing with a lot of friends with me to expose only the truth with no lies in the channel We Act, the Israeli government can call us a terror organization. We, as Jewish, because we are saying things not so popular for the government or the system that treat people like slaves and like not human beings. I'm sorry to say that, but yes, I want all over the world know that Israeli people, normal Israeli people, don't have problems with Palestinians. We don't want to go to army. We don't want war. And now we are going to elections, in Israel now, because you know what happens with Benjamin Netanyahu. And now we're going to election. And Israel, when Israel in the government say, oh, we are going to bring peace, I said, okay, this is another manipulation, because it's like saying to the people of Israel, to their consciousness, we are living in a war, so we are going to bring you the peace. We don't have war with the Palestinians. You understand what I say, David? I mean, we don't go to army to fight the Palestinians. There is a Hamas in Palestinian, but also the Palestinian people suffered from the Hamas.
Of course they do, because what is that in its own way but just another elite imposing its will on the rest of the population? You've got that happening in Palestine, you've got the same happening in Israel, and the two imposed upon populations are then put against each other in conflict and fear. This is what happens in every country and in every culture.
Correct. Correct.
Recurring theme. And the only way to break it is for the population in general to stop falling for it, to stop looking for its leadership to tell it what to think. I mean, you just mentioned the election here. Who's this bloke, this former military leader? Benny Gantz, is it?
Yeah.
I mean, I've just seen some of his advertisements where he's showing pictures of devastated, bombed out areas of Gaza, and he's wearing it like a war medal as a reason for why people should vote for him. So what kind of choice, political choice, and from what I'm reading, the opinion polls, it's Netanyahu and Gantz that are 1 and 2 at the moment. What kind of choice is that? What they're saying is, people of Israel, do you want to be led by this psychopath or this one?
Correct.
Where does that go? And do you know what? All around the world, that same choice is being given, and we've got to stop accepting it. We've got to stop being given these fake choices. Now, the reason that what you say is absolutely right about, we'll give you peace. They don't want peace. They've never wanted peace. This is the point. For their own reasons, this elite wants the entirety of that land. And therefore, you're having more and more and more settlements, especially since Trump came in, who just, looks the other way, with his lifelong friend of Netanyahu on his side, Yavid Kushner, his son-in-law and senior advisor.
Correct.
More and more settlements are being built because the idea all along has been to take the entirety of that land. They're now saying we want to bring the Golan Heights officially into Israel. It's an acquisition of land. That's what it's all been about. They don't want peace. Yep. So there have been talks about roadmaps, and then talks about talks and more talks, and then suddenly, oh no, we can't do it now, not like now this has happened. It's been putting off and putting off, buying time all the time since 1948 so that this can happen. And I still see, and I still hear, and it's pathetic, people say, I believe in the two-state solution. Excuse me, have you seen the settlements in the West Bank? There is no two-state anymore, and there never was meant to be one. That's why they're now starting to talk about a one-state solution, which is what was planned all along, and that's why this national state law is being introduced for a Jewish-dominated state, which for me is apartheid, that's my view. And it's because they never wanted peace. And if you don't want peace because you have a political agenda of there not being, you have to keep your population constantly in fear of the population you don't want peace with.
Correct.
And what's been happening decade after decade after decade. And when Israelis get wise to this, and I'm sure you're not the only one who has, then we can start seeing a situation where the abused, manipulated, and oppressed masses of Palestinians come together in common cause with the abused and oppressed masses in Israel, and start to break this manipulated conflict, this manipulated division. Because you talk to anybody, you've indicated it already, Guy, you talk to anybody around the world in any culture, you find me how many people want war, how many people want conflict. They just want to live their life in peace and freedom, bring their kids up, have fun, pursue what they want to do in life without having to look over their shoulder. But if you can create a situation where your population is constantly in fear of the actions of another population, going both ways, by the way, then what happens is the populations look to the violent ones to protect them from the violent ones on the other side. So suddenly that being in the military in Israel becomes like a heroic act because, oh, we're protecting Israel. Well, actually, maybe if we went down a different road uh, of, um, of going about this, and we didn't have elites and violent elites fighting each other and dominating their populations, then maybe the population itself on both sides could come together and we'd all get on. You know, again and again you see military people who have been brought up and have been, I'm not just talking about in Israel, that certainly applies in Israel, America, etc., where they've been brought up to have a certain view of the world and to perceive the demonization of a quote enemy to be how they are. And so because the enemy is demonized, anything goes. Oh, we'll go in and we'll pull children out of bed in the West Bank in the middle of the night, terrified little kids, and we'll throw them in jail. Yeah, that's not a problem because they are lower than low. They're just animals. I don't have to treat them with respect. But you take them out of that situation and you put them together in a room and you let them chat. You let them chat for a bit. You let them talk about their aspirations, about what they want to do with their life, their aspirations for their children. And then, you know, you get an Israeli soldier talking about what he wants to do in his life and the aspirations he has for his kids, talking to a Palestinian parent, talking about what he wants to do with his life and the aspirations he has for his kids, right? You let that go on for a while, and then you tell the Israeli soldier that he's got to act violently towards that person. And he won't. Well, unless he's a psychopath, he won't. Because suddenly common humanity has actually fused them together in mutual understanding. And thus, the soldier's view of what he's doing suddenly changes because what he has been demonized to believe in, what has been demonized, has now been seen in a different light. And of course, what we've seen with Breaking the Silence and these fantastic former ADF Jewish soldiers, and these fantastic young Jewish young people who refuse to join the military because they won't be part of that occupying force and that violence. We've seen what they have done and what the soldiers who've been in the IDF and then speak out about it through Breaking the Silence. What we've seen is this fusion of empathy, where people have seen what they're doing and what is being done. And out of sheer basic humanity and compassion, they've said, I'm not doing it anymore. Or in terms of the young people, I'm not doing it at all. And of course, what happens? This is the inverted, crazy world that we live in. When you have such decency, such basic humanity, such an open heart, that you refuse to join through compulsion and conscription the Israeli army to impose its will on the Palestinian population, you are rewarded for your compassion and your decency and your genuineness by being sent to jail. But if you say, yes, sir, I will get in my plane and I will pepper bomb civilian cities and areas of Gaza, or yes, sir, I will go and pull kids out of their bed in the middle of the night in the West Bank and throw them in jail, terrified, wetting themselves out of fear, then you are a hero. And this is the manifestation of a deeply inverted society where compassion goes to jail and psychopathy gets a medal This is the world that we've allowed to be created. And I'll say to the population of Israel and of England and of America and of South Africa and of Australia and of Russia and of everywhere else, we're all in the same boat, ladies, gentlemen, and children.
Right.
Have been manipulated to fear each other by elites that benefit from us fearing each other. I've watched, Guy, documentaries and films made by independent filmmakers in Israel, Jewish filmmakers, where they've talked to young people, and the young people in Israel have said, well, you know, we know the rest of the world hates us. I got some news for you. We don't.
Yeah.
We don't. I mean, of course you're going to have one or two, again, psychopathic idiots who are so obsessed with their own label that they don't like another label simply for the fact that it's a label. Oh, I don't like Jewish people. Well, why? Why don't you like Jewish people? They're a massive spectrum of view of opinion. What do you mean you don't like Jewish people? Any dismissal of one group is just insane. But what has happened is that so many young people growing up and then going into the military have been programmed, perceptually programmed.
Programmed, yes.
Believe the rest of the world hates. We don't. We don't. I don't care if you're Jewish, like I said, or Outer Mongolian. It's all the same to me. I'm interested in what you do, not what your background is and where you were, you know, conceived. It doesn't matter to me.
Sure.
But if people fall for that, you see, if they fall for that idea that the rest of the world hates them, then simply because of the fact that they're Jewish, what happens is there's this cocoon that then comes around you, perceptually and literally, where you think, well, if the rest of the world hates us, then we must have to be protected from the rest of the world. Thus, we must look to the government and the military to protect us. And that's the scam that's not just being played in Israel since 1948. It's being played in every other country, not least in America.
Of course. You know, when I was 18, I was forced, like every 18 people, if you are woman or man, to go to army for 3 years, men's, and girls for 2 years. If you ask me today, after all I know, the truth I know about the system and what is the manipulation, I never go to this army or any army, because when I understand that we have to fight for Hamas, against the Hamas, that doing the life difficult also for the Palestinians and do bombardings here in Israel, and who pay them to those Hamas? Israel government. Israel is paying money to these organizations, terror organizations so-called, to terrorize the Palestinians and the Israelis. So this is why we are forced to defend our families here in Israel.
Yeah, well, the thing is, Guy, and I might be going to be controversial on both sides here. I do hope so. I don't care. I'm interested in the truth, not a statue.
Of course.
But if you want people to be in fear of your target, then you need to make sure that that target appears to be something you should be fearful of. So you benefit from having a, quote, monster that you can use to frighten your own population into acquiescence to your power. Now, if you look back through history, this is a constant trick that's been played by culture after culture after culture, generation after generation. You create a monster, and if it doesn't naturally exist, which it usually doesn't, then you'll invent it. to frighten the population into doing what you want, because you have to do what the government wants, because they're going to protect you from the monster. So these monsters are created all the time, so that people can be frightened of them. And Hamas is another one.
Correct.
And I've noticed this, that whenever there's a situation unfolding that maybe we're moving towards a place of calm or whatever, whenever it's moving towards a position that the regime running Israel doesn't like, oh, it's getting too peaceful here, or maybe the Israeli military has done something horrific which it can't really defend, although it always tries, then suddenly these bombs, missiles start dropping out of Gaza. And the number of times I've thought, well, do you know something? That is happening at just the time, politically and through propaganda, that the Israeli government would like it to happen. And if it happens once, you think coincidence. But it happens too often for there to be a coincidence. And what I think would be a great way of solving this is to take the Israeli elite that wants constant fear and constant conflict, take the Hamas elite and connected elites who also want this conflict to continue, put them in a room, lock the frickin' door, and let the general population then come together rather, and get on with reaching a resolution. Because till that happens, this is going to go on, or until enough of the population realize on both sides that they're being had like every other group in the world, and cease to give their power away to these elites. What's the point? I mean, people are actually going to vote in this upcoming Israeli election. Some will vote for Netanyahu, some will vote for Benny Gantz, but they're voting for the same force, the same future, and the same ongoing story.
Correct.
And therefore, voting for elites to serve the agenda of elites is just going to take us into a perpetual, ongoing Groundhog Day. Where, what's that great line? If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And that's why this is perpetuated. Oh no, we've got a new prime minister now, it's Benny Gantz. Yeah, and what's going to change? Well, it might get just a touch more violent. Yes, it may do, but what will actually change? Nothing. And oh, we're going to have elections in among the Palestinians and stuff. Well, what's going to change? Well, nothing. So the people, the vast majority, the great majority of what we call Palestinians and the great majority of what we call Jewish Israelis, we've got to come together and do it. Because the elites don't want us to come together. It's not in their interests on either side.
Of course. The plan is, if the plan is to have control of mind, of consciousness, and keep you doing what they want to do, so they create for you the problem because they have a solution. And it's like Frank Sinatra sang the song of Paul Anka that he write, I did it my way. Yeah. And that's the only thing. If you don't do it their way, you don't have even a highway to go. So that's why Jewish people that criticize the Israeli government and Israel's behavior towards the Palestinians are in fact more
attacked, abused, and vilified than non-Jewish people. Because it's not about Jewish people and non-Jewish people. It's about what this elite wants and what it doesn't. And if Jewish people are challenging this elite, then they are treated in just the same way. And because it's more difficult, like I said earlier, they still try, bizarrely, but because it's more difficult to dub a Jewish Jewish person anti-Semitic, they demonize and attack them even more because they're more dangerous in a way. Because it's much more difficult just to say, "Oh, they're an anti-Semite." It doesn't stand up like it might do to against a non-Jewish person. Once you realize that's happening, it's clearly not about Jewish people, and it's not about protecting Jewish people. It's about protecting an agenda in which Jewish people are actually the victims as much as anyone else.
Correct. Now, when you say Jewish, it's very important to say in Israel, in the history of Israel, you have 12 brothers, and everybody have a name, of course, and everybody have a land. By the way, it's never written in the Bible that the Israeli have to build a country in Israel land. Second thing, when you say Jewish, is one of the 12 brothers. His name was Judah, and the first time that you see a figure, an Israeli figure called Jewish, is Mordechai. That this is in Purim when they dress, when we dress, like Halloween in Halloween that they dress, So Jewish is not being an Israeli. No, Jewish is only one of the brothers. Now, Zion is the name of Jerusalem. That's it. So, if you have Zionism or Judaism, it only can be agenda today. Israeli is the people, and the people of Israel and the people of Palestinian and the people of England and all over the world, they suffered equally. The people.
Exactly. When I say Jewish Israelis, I'm doing it for a simple reason: to equate people who are not Arab Israelis, because that again, you've got the division between Arab Israelis and non-Arab Israelis, if you want, like that. But you bring up a very, very good point. Is that these labels, like Jewish and Zionism and all these things, and all these histories, well, I mean, how many histories of any group, any background, any country are actually 100% correct? And how many times have those histories been changed to suit the elite and the authority of the time when it suited them to make that change? So, we need to question everything and see if it stands up, including versions of history. But again, you make a very good point. Why don't we talk about Israelis? And whether you are an Arab Israeli or what, just for want of a term, a Jewish Israeli, you're Israelis. I mean, there's an arena in which people can come together. Oh yes, you follow this religion, you follow that religion, but we're one group, we're one family, we're one country. But what the elite is doing is seeking to stop that coming together by creating this Jewish dominated state as they've pushed through, and again, it's a way of dividing, and again, it's a very simple thing. If you impose injustice on people and you will do nothing to stop that injustice, then the receiver of the injustice has a choice. They can accept the injustice ongoing, as if that's how it's always going to be, or they can take what they perceive to be the only other thing that they can do to try to stop the injustice, and that's to turn to violence.
Correct.
So it's all right saying, condemn violence. I condemn violence. All violence is nonsensical and ridiculous. But if we're interested in peace, then surely there has to be some self-examination over why the violence is happening. Would the same, this is a question, would the same violence be happening if the purveyors of the violence were in a situation where everyone was treated the same? Because what you're doing then is you're taking away the impetus of the violence, which is perceived injustice. And absolutely, for sure, the violence wouldn't disappear altogether, because there will always be psychopaths on both sides.
Of course.
It would dramatically reduce, because basically, if you've got a fire, right, and it's burning out of control, and you want to stop that, what do? Do you pour water on it, or do you pour petrol on it? And what this perpetuation of injustice is doing, it builds up resentment, and resentment turns often to violence. But because you're pouring petrol on it. And you know, this is the worst thing, and this is a very important point I would like to get across here. It applies absolutely to Israel, but it applies around the world to everyone else as well. And that is that the worst situation you can create is when someone, individually or in terms of the Palestinians collectively, reach a point where they say, we've got nothing left to lose. What's the worst that can happen if we do A, B, or C? Well, how is that worse than what's happening now? Once you reach that point of, I've got nothing to lose, that's when things start to get really out of hand, because any limit on what you would do is gone, because that limit might be, well, what about the consequences for me of doing it? Well, if the consequences are no worse than what's happening already, those consequences no longer are a limiting factor in your decision making. And you know, if people don't have a situation where they can see any hope of justice and fairness, then they're gonna, not everybody by any means, but some are gonna react against that in the only other way they can think of, which is violence. And you know, if there is a situation involving two sides, then it involves two sides. And it's no good people standing up in the Israeli government or anywhere else and saying it's all the Palestinians' fault, Palestinian violence. Because all that's doing is perpetuating ongoing what's happening, because nothing's going to change if you do that. And don't look in the mirror and say, well, actually, how are we helping to create this? And you know, we've got an Israeli ambassador in London called Mark Regev. And I watched during one of the bombardments of Gaza, I think it was 2014, Mark Regev, every night, and he's still doing it over here in London, he knows no other way. He was Netanyahu's spokesman. Crikey, what a nightmare job. Trying to make sense of him.
Yeah.
But, although they probably think very much alike. And Regev, every night on British television, was justifying the pepper bombing of civilian areas in Gaza on the basis of violence. And you know, I mean, that takes something, doesn't it? We're trying to stop violence. Yeah, okay, so how are you doing it? Well, we're pepper bombing civilian areas. And the situation will never change while we have that mentality. It simply won't. And this elite doesn't want it to. So the people on both sides, the populations of both sides, need to do it, and bypass these people as best we can.
That's correct. You know, when the system is that you live in a darkness and you feel like you have around you snakes and, you know, all those bugs that you don't want them to touch you, all the the only thing that lasts for you to do is just to switch the light on, and all of them are going to disappear. This is something that people don't understand, and they keep on, trying to survive this darkness room. And when you feel that you are closed and everything is closing you, and you cannot move, and you have to work so hard to pay a mortgage, or to pay rent, or to pay, for food, I mean, natural food. Why a country, a government, or anybody, anyone, can have a permission to own or to divide the nature? I mean, who give them the right to fly with airplanes all over the sky and spread chemtrails without telling the people that owns, I mean, the nature, own the nature? I mean, why people are shouting and not shouting and saying enough is enough? You understand what I mean? So then, when you are in a land and you have borders, I mean, you can say you are a Democrat and you have your freedom, but you have a freedom in this border. I mean, if you go out, you are not having this freedom. I mean, you don't have a freedom. There is no freedom.
Now, the thing is
yes.
that what you've just mentioned is interesting. What is freedom? You see, so much of what is perceived to be freedom is not freedom, it's the freedom to conform, right? So if you never say anything, for instance, in Israel, that is at odds with the official narrative and what this elite agenda wants to happen, then you will perceive that you have freedom of speech and freedom of expression and freedom of opinion, because no one will ever try to stop you or silence you. Oh yeah, I've got freedom. Yeah, but you are someone who's challenging that elite agenda and challenging that elite in general. If they think they have freedom when they're censored and silenced and abused.
Yes, but is the speech is free? I mean, you don't have to announce that you have the freedom of speech. I mean, if you have it, it's like I said, the government of Israel or any government cannot sell that they are going to bring peace. Because if this is the propaganda that we are going to bring peace to this land, I mean, you directly say to those people, you live in war. This is why I give you the upside. I mean, it's like, okay, you take the word freedom, okay? We know from the Bible that we have a dome above us, okay? So what freedom for me is to have a free dome. What is everything under this dome have to be free and not controlled by anyone. Not banks, not interest, not politics, nothing. I mean, we have to release all the vegetables, animals, all that it's nature, we have to send free. And also the borders are not nature. There is not nature.
Yeah, but the idea that an authority can decide if you have freedom of speech or not is utterly bizarre. We are expressions of an infinite state of awareness having an experience. Why should anyone take it on to themselves to decide and dictate who can have an opinion on this and who can have an opinion on that and who can't? See, my philosophy is that people must be allowed, if we are going to talk about freedom, to have any opinion that they like and to say whatever they like. Now, if people say, oh, well, what about, encouraging people into violence? But there are laws against that. But there are laws against that after the point of delivery. That's really important, the point of delivery. Because once you have freedom of speech at the point of delivery, no authority has the power to decide what people can hear and what they can't hear. Once you have the censorship before the point of delivery, and that's happening more and more with the internet giants and algorithms, it means that you're giving an authority the ability to decide what people hear and don't hear. And of course, that's getting more extreme all the time. So if someone has incitement to violence or incitement to burn someone's houses down, well, there is a law against that. But if you start saying, well, we must start censoring to stop things being said at all, what you're doing then is giving this authority the power to decide what people see and hear and what they don't see and hear.
Yeah.
And once you start, it's a very slippery road, because as we've seen, what it starts with is we must censor incitement to terrorism. Okay. Well, there are laws against that once it's delivered. But once you then say, okay, and most people not realizing where this is meant to go, will say, oh, yeah, I can buy that. Yeah, stopping people inciting terrorism, stop them saying it. Yeah, okay. But that's not where it stops. Then you go to the next stage, which is we must stop all hate speech and stop it being said. Now, what is hate speech? Well, whatever they decide it is. And then they say, oh, we must stop fake news. What's fake news? Whatever they decide it is, usually challenging the official version of events. And so you're going down this road. Or you must not say this about transgender people. You must not say this about mass immigration. You must not say. And so what you've got is this road where more and more views and information are being censored before the point of delivery. And you're heading towards a situation which is what was planned from the start, where eventually only what the authorities want people to see and hear will they ever see and hear. Everything else will be censored. And this protection racket that I talked about earlier to stop criticism of Israel by using the excuse of anti-Semitism when it's not, is part of creating this situation where people only see and hear what the authorities want us to see and hear. And we should never forget that our freedom of speech is everyone else's freedom of speech. Because if everyone doesn't have freedom of speech, no one has it. Because what's left is not freedom of speech, but freedom to conform within the confines dictated by the state. And that's why we must not be intimidated into censoring ourselves. That's the worst kind of censorship, self-censorship. That's what the intimidation's all about. So they don't have to censor it. People just don't say it anymore because they fear the consequences. That's the most insidious and most destructive of censorship. We must not fall for that. Yep. But the most important thing is that we realize that we're all in this together. And it might be worth, Guy, just very quickly describing the structure within which all this is going on.
Please.
We talked about, Israel, quite right too, in in this interview. But Israel is a part of a whole, and understanding the whole is to understand, as with every other country, what's going on in Israel. There is a global network. On one level, it's a mass of secrets, interconnecting secret societies. But this is basically how it works. You have a spider's web. You can visualize a spider's web. In the center, you have the spider. That's deep in the shadows, and that's where it's basically coming out of. Immediately around the spider, you've got strands in the web that are symbolic of the most secretive and exclusive secret societies. And they're the ones that really know what this web is trying to achieve. You come further out from the spider and you meet, still in the hidden, secret societies that we've heard of, the Freemasons. And I'm talking about the inner sanctum of these organizations, the Knights of Malta, the Opus Dei, and etc., the inner core of the Jesuit order, so on. And the inner core of Ultra-Zionism, by the way, which is a secret society if you go deep enough into it.
Agent one. Yes.
And we should talk about Zionism in a second, what it really is. And then you come further out of the web, and then you hit a point where the hidden meets the seen. And in the scene, you've got government agencies, governments themselves, you've got the mainstream media, you've got the global banking system, you've got the global corporations and so on, who appear to be making random decisions about the world, the military too. But the society changing decisions that appear to be so random, that are pushing the world in a certain direction incessantly, no matter what political party's in power, are not random decisions. They're coming from this spider, and it's playing out through this web. And it's basically structured, this web, like a transnational corporation. If you think of McDonald's, if you have to, the headquarters is in America. So that's the center of the McDonald's web, if you like. That's where the spider is. But all over the world, in every country, you've got a McDonald's network within that country. And if you go into a McDonald's in South Africa or Russia or Australia or Europe, you're basically going into the same McDonald's, because the way they operate, their corporate way of operating, is in line with that dictated from the headquarters. And this web works the same way. In every country, Israel absolutely among them, you have a network of secret societies and elite groupings, which together make one elite. And their role is to run their country in line with the dictators of the spider. And therefore, when I travel around the world, as I do all the time, I see the same things being introduced in different countries and different cultures, often using the same excuses to bring in the same laws and the same changes in society. So it becomes a global phenomenon, because it's being centrally dictated. And so in each country, you've got this elite which dictates to the population of that country everywhere. What they then do is play their population off against other populations, but in all these different elites eventually fuse into one global elite. And I'll tell you something else. We could come back to this definition of anti-Semitism. This is another scam that's going on with it. Mm-hmm. What they are saying is that if you talk about a global cabal manipulating global events, that is what they call, you hear it more and more, an anti-Semitic trope. Now, you might not even be including anything to do with Jewish people in it, but the fact that you're talking about a global elite means that you must be anti-Semitic. You must be talking about a Jewish elite. I spoke in an event at a place called Watford in North London a few weeks ago, and a guy came along to do a report. It was the most incredibly biased report, and he was a Zionist, and he described me as poison. 2 sentences, it could have been 1, I think it was 2, after he called me poison, he said, David Icke does not, in this talk, or any other, by the way, basically hurl abuse and condemn Jewish people. So hold on a minute. So why am I poison? Because he's talking about a global cabal manipulating global events, and that's an anti-Semitic trope. He must be talking about Jewish people, right? This is what happens. So what you've got now, Guy, is not just a protection racket to stop criticism of the ultra-Zionist elite. You've got a protection racket to stop anyone talking about any global network manipulating global events. And it's all being coldly, systematically done. And again, when people see that, they get frustrated, they get angry, they get resentful, and they blame all Jewish people, many of them, for what a handful are actually doing. And that's why the mass of of Jewish people, Israeli people, have got to get a grip and call out this elite and its effort to censor criticism of Israel in its various means, and exposure of this global cabal. Why would you, rhetorical question, but I'll ask it anyway, why would you, as a Zionist elite, want to use the label of anti-Semitism to stop someone talking about a global cabal manipulating global events, even if they're not blaming Jewish people for it? I mean, how does that work? What that says to me is there is an agenda here to stop exposure of this global cabal that goes way beyond what they're claiming, which is protecting Jewish people from discrimination. Because why? The elite that control Israel lock into the elite that controls Britain, that controls America, that controls all these different countries. They are masks on the same face.
Yeah.
And this is what is happening. And when the penny drops that this is what is happening, we as a human family, no matter where it comes from or where it's located, have a chance of coming together and bringing an end to this nonsense. Because until we do, we'll be divided and ruled to a world that will not only just go on as it is, but will go on getting more and more extreme, quicker and quicker and quicker, in terms of freedom of expression, and in terms of conflict. And I say quicker and quicker and quicker for this reason. It's a simple equation. The more you centralize power, the more power you have at the center to centralize even quicker. And what we've been seeing over thousands of years is the incessant centralization of power, where you had people in a tribal situation where the tribe decided what the tribe did and what happened in the tribe. Then lots of tribes came together in what we call nations, and now a few people at the center of the nation are dictating to all the former tribes in that nation. Then in Europe now we've got the European Union, which is the centralization of power by bringing the nations together, which were all the former tribes, under one centralized bureaucratic dictatorship in Brussels. You've got globalization, which is what? The centralization of power in every area of our lives. You've got these trading blocks, which are centralization structures dictating to every country within the trading bloc. And what you're seeing is fewer and fewer and fewer people getting control over the lives of more and more and more. And the idea is that it eventually becomes a world government dictating to everyone on the planet from a central point, a world army imposing the will of the world government on anyone that doesn't want to accept it, a world central bank dictating all global finance, a world currency, which I've been warning about now for 30 years, the plan to get rid of cash and have a one single world digital global currency with, look at how cash is disappearing. Mm-hmm. And finally, although there are many more things, but in the main headlines, to have a population connected by technology to technology, so that artificial intelligence is connected to the human brain, and the human brain mind becomes artificial intelligence and not the human mind that we operate with now. This is all where this is going. And, you know, in the same way that you've had in Israel-Palestine talks about roadmaps and talks about talks to delay and delay and delay, so more and more Palestinian land can be occupied to the point where any two-state solution is impossible, then you're seeing also this situation where we're going more and more down the road to this dystopian society of, in the end, AI control. And while it's going on, people are being diverted from seeing it by all the conflict playing off against each other and the divide and rule. So we're so focused on conflict with each other and arguing with each other, we don't actually see where everyone, all of us, is being taken. And I would say this, because I think it's important, Guy, too. When I'm talking about this web, this web is global, and it has many different facets and faces, which, if you go deep enough into them, all have basically the same agenda. It's kind of interesting when you look at it that since the 12th century, when the Knights Templar were created, of course, have a great connection, ancient connection to Jerusalem.
Of course.
They had a goal of rebuilding what they call Solomon's Temple on the site of the great mosque in Jerusalem. This is a secret society still going now, massively influential in places like the City of London, that has had this goal. But it's no one's saying that it's a Jewish Hebrew kind of organization, but it has this goal. And then along comes Zionism, which starts to have the same goal, a much more modern phenomenon, has the same goal as well. And so different aspects of the web may look different, they may appear to come from different directions, but this web is operating a global agenda. And for whatever reason, putting that rebuilt temple on that site of the mosque is part of the agenda of this web, and has been for a very, very long time. Before Israel was created, modern Israel was created. Now, what we're seeing, if you look at it from that perspective, is the totalitarian tiptoe, as I call it, the stepping stones towards that. When Trump came in, Trump is surrounded by people with that agenda, like the American ambassador to Israel, currently, Friedman, like his son-in-law, Yared Kushner, like his Treasury Secretary, Steve Mnuchin, and others. And so this movement of the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem is part of this movement towards this end goal of replacing the mosque with a rebuilt Solomon's Temple. And this is also why there is this, and you can't call it anything other, I don't think, this cleansing of Palestinians, ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from East Jerusalem. All these things are connected because they're going towards this goal. And it's not in the interests of Jewish people and Israelis. It's in the interests of this web, which the elite of Israel are a part of, just as the elite in America and the elite in Britain and France, etc., are all part of. And so if we can see the web and the fact that the elites that are in different countries are only assets of the web, then we can maybe see why so much dividing and ruling goes on, so that we're so obsessed with each other, we're not actually looking out and saying, whoa, so that's what's going on. We're all being manipulated, whether it's Israeli or Palestinian, American, South African, we're all being manipulated ultimately by the same web. Correct. To the same end. Yeah. This is why we have to come together, because that's the last thing this web wants us to do, is come together in common cause. And it's about time, and it's urgent.
Well, a lot of people all over the world are opening their eyes. And, a lot of people ask me in Israel and also around the world, they ask me, okay, Guy, we are little, very little. I mean, the system is very big and we are very little. What we can do? I said, okay, take a moment and think. If you are so little, why the system push so much power and put so much power for you not to move if you are so little. I mean, because you are the real power. Inside you, you have the power. If you let them show you and lead you to live a material life, to live a one perspective life, so your power is down. It's like they stop your power and you are in automatic life. You live an automatic life. You go to the same work, same place, same people, same this, same that. I mean, release yourself. We talk about freedom. This is real freedom. Not to give a hand to those systems who can take your both hands and your creativity and shut it out. This is
Well,
what I answer.
I absolutely agree with you, Guy. But I mean, here's a question. The last time I looked, there were about 8 million people in Israel.
Mhm.
8 million. How many of that 8 million are actually running Israel and deciding what happens there? How many? Not even close to 8 million. A fraction of 8 million. And it's the same in every other country, and globally it's the same with the 7.5 billion human beings on the planet. A tiny, tiny number within Israelis 8 million are dictating the lives of those 8 million. Now, if Netanyahu or Benny Gantz, when he's not making his videos glorifying dead people, if one of them came out of the Prime Minister's office or the Parliament building and said, right, we've had a discussion, we've had a meeting, and this is what's going to happen. What if vast numbers or a high ratio of that 8 million people said, we're not doing it. We're not doing that. We're not going to cooperate with that. Where is their power?
No power.
Done. Their power, whether it's the Israeli elite or the American elite or the British elite, their power is in the acquiescence of the public to their decisions and to their will. It's got to stop. If people want to bring in laws that are fair and just across the whole population, where it's not about enslavement and it's not about oppression, maybe it's about, I don't know, protection or whatever, then, okay, yeah, all right, yes, I see that, and it applies to everybody, and the, you know, it's not any position of will, it's just, say, laws that protect freedom, that say, no, you can't stop people speaking at meetings. They have to be allowed to speak at meetings. You can't just shut them down because you don't like what they're going to say. Those kind of laws, yeah, okay, fair enough. But if though they come out of that building and say, we've had a meeting and we're going to increase the enslavement and oppression and the financial consequences for Israelis, and if enough of them say, we're not doing it, we're not cooperating with it, well, where's the power? They have no power. Their power is in the acquiescence of the population. That's why they have to divide and rule the population, so the population doesn't come together in unity and say, we are not having it in unity. Because at that point, this elite, which compared with the target populations are tiny, loses its power and its ability to impose its will. So coming together is not just coming together in peace and harmony and mutual respect. It's actually taking the power away from these elites around the world that that can then use that power to impose its will upon the population. You take that out. Everything comes from that. Everything comes from ceasing to cooperate with our own enslavement, because that's essential for the few to control the many.
Yeah, that's true. I said all the time, I said, before you defend some system, check if they are going to defend you also. I mean, if it's not double way and it's not an equal interaction, and you all the time give and give and give to the system, and the system like put you down and don't see you and see you as something transparent. I mean, why you keep on going there? I mean, for what? You see it's not working, it's ruining your life, it's ruining your kids, it's ruining your family, it's ruining your uh, natural way to eat nature. So why you keep on going there? Why you keep on going to banks? Why you go to work? Work don't release you. Work don't give you more money. It never gives you more money. Creativity give you weight of living altogether.
Well, I mean, for a start, where does all this money that comes out of America into Israel, where does it go? It doesn't go to the people.
Not to us, not to Israeli people.
It doesn't. And again, what kind of elite condemns people criticizing what it's doing as anti-Semites and constantly exploits, because it does, what happened in Nazi Germany to get its end, its political end today? That same elite that does that, and I think that's contemptuous of those Jewish people in Nazi Germany, by the way, exploiting them for political ends now. Absolutely disgusting.
Yeah.
But that same elite, as you have told me, leaves people who suffered in Nazi Germany in poverty. You were telling me that some of them, even their teeth are falling out through lack of nutrition. What the hell is that all about? And it really is time for the people of the world who are being oppressed and imposed upon by this elite in all its forms, not just the Israeli elite, all its forms, to come together and say, we're not having it anymore. No more. Because if we don't, if we're all having it and accepting it while complaining about it, but still cooperating with it, then it will just go on. And like I say, it won't just go on. It will get more and more extreme, because that's where it's meant to go.
Yeah.
Come on, people. Come on, people of Israel. I mean, I don't think any different of you than I think of anybody else in the world. I don't think any different of you than I think of white British people or black South Africans. They're just different expressions of experience to be celebrated. Because what would be boring if we were all the same? Put down these labels as a means of division, and let's see that an oppressed, economically disadvantaged Israeli is the same as an oppressed, disadvantaged guy sleeping in the street in Los Angeles or London.
Yeah.
Someone who's trying to get by on very little, while an elite has monumental amounts of wealth.
Mm-hmm.
This is not because you're Israeli or you're American or you're South African. This is because that's how the web works. And until we address that every country works basically the same, and therefore the people of every country and culture and religion need to come together in unity on that basis, then this will go on. If we come together, if we refuse to be divided and ruled, this elite will lose its power so quickly it will be staggering, and their house of cards will come down. And then we, as a human family, expressions of the same consciousness having different experiences, will then be able to get on and build and enjoy and experience a very different and a far more decent world.
High experience, yes. It's going to be, we're going to have a high experience and not material experience. This is what I believe when we are going to release this vehicle. This is my belief. I mean, how the system create criminals. It's like you give to someone work and to other not you he cannot work. I mean, these have money for to buy food or to rent, and this one not. So this one who don't have, he's going to steal for to have, because he must eat, he must have a roof. I mean, basic humanity. So this is how the government, the system, all this package of elites control the division and make the ups and downs in the community. I mean, yes.
Well, what you were saying there is exactly the same as what I was saying earlier,
Hmm.
in the sense that if you ignore injustice for long enough, then the subject of the injustice either has to accept the injustice ongoing in the example you give, not in being able to feed their family, or they do something else to get it, like steal it. And if they didn't have to steal to eat, they wouldn't steal to eat. So in one fell swoop, you remove hungry people and people stealing food. But if you have a situation where people have the choice between hunger or stealing food, some of them are going to steal food, and you can barely understand that, frankly.
Of course.
And so, again, what we're discussing here is a circumstance, a structure of injustice and inequality. Because, you know, I hear this progressive mentality talking about discrimination and inclusion. But what about the discrepancy? You know, whether this label can be something be said about this label or that label or whatever label, and then the injustices of some people going to bed hungry and some people having more money than they could spend in 1,000 lifetimes, gets missed, the real injustice, the real lack of inclusion. And if we can have a more just society, then there'll be less response to the consequences of injustice, and we will then remove a lot of the things we'd like to remove. Of course, there'll always be people that want to steal from other people. Of course, you'll have that. But the numbers, the scale of it will reduce. The scale of it stops when, or reduces dramatically when you reduce the injustice. You know, if you're sleeping in Skid Row or whatever different names are given to these areas, like in Los Angeles and other places, and you have no money, you have no hope, and you've got an empty belly, I mean, what are you going to do? Just stay hungry and eventually just wither away, or are you going to do something to try to get something to eat? You take away the injustice, you take away what comes from that injustice. This is why these deep divisions in society, where, I mean, we're now heading towards the point, literally towards the point, where a handful of people in the world, a handful, own more wealth than the poorest half of the global population. Now, that is insane. And from that injustice in the distribution of wealth and opportunity comes all the ills, so many of the ills anyway, of society that creates.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is that centralization of wealth goes on and on and on, and the wealth is pulled more and more out of the population into the hands of this few, this elite. Because today, because of the way that the world is structured and society is structured, money equals choice. The more money you have, the more choice you have. And what is choice? It is the arbiter of freedom. Because the more choices you have, the freer you are. The less choices you have, the less free you are. And because money is the great dictator of how much choice you have, the ones that hoard the money have all the choice, and the population that doesn't have their choices dramatically limited, thus their freedom dramatically limited. And therefore, when you look at the money system, it's not just about greed. Of course, there's lots of greed in there, but ultimately, the bottom line of control of money by a very few people is control of choice, which means control of freedom. And the idea is it gets worse, not better. So it really is time that we put the labels down, we put the divisions down, and try to realize we're all in this together. Israeli, Jewish, Australian, South African, South American, Central American, American, Canadian, whatever, Russian,
Yeah.
Chinese, we are in this together, and we need to come together in mutual, in unity of purpose to bring an end to this elite controlled world that everyone takes the consequences for.
That's right. Now, if we take this person that have to steal for to eat, this is not the real crime. The real crime is the system that control the food and make you steal because you know you have to have food for to eat. So this system create the crime.
How much food gets thrown out in this world every day, which people who are hungry could be eating, but
Yes.
it's thrown out because they want to keep the price up and not devalue the food price by distributing it widely to people that currently can't afford it. The idea that anyone goes to bed hungry in this world is ridiculous compared with the food that's available. You look at the food that's thrown away, and I'll tell you one of the most horrific things, Guy, I've had it seen in my life. It was being in Ecuador many years ago now, and I was standing next to this massive rubbish heap, trash heap, enormous pile of rubbish. And twice a day, and I was there when it happened on one occasion, the vans would come from the Western hotels in Quito, and they would throw all the unused food from the hotels, where all the Western people and others, the elite stayed, onto this rubbish heap. Mm-hmm. And around the outside of the rubbish heap were little kind of put together huts. And suddenly, when the van arrived, where, you know, I was standing there, you could see, it seemed empty. When the vans arrived, suddenly people appeared from all directions, out of these huts and from other directions. And they were scavenging for the food being thrown to them out of these vans from these Western hotels. And in that one image, the world of injustice and the way the world's structured, in Israel, like everywhere else, was there to be seen, where the few are scavenging over the drops that the elite few will allow them to have. And if that food was distributed on the basis of hunger and need, and not on the basis of money, no one in Ecuador needed to be hungry. But they were, because of this structure, the structure that's everywhere. It's unbelievable. You know, you see this multitude of food, and you see people hungry. That alone should tell people that not only is the world totally skewed, it's skewed because it's meant to be skewed. So a few can dictate and live off the backs and live off the labor of everyone else. Got to stop. Now's the time to stop it before it gets to its ultimate goal, which is not that far away if we go on sitting on our backsides and cooperating with our own enslavement any longer.
That's right. This is why we do those shows, and I'm so happy that you agree and accept my invitation to have this show together to the Israeli people and to understand.
Fantastic, mate. Been fantastic. I've loved it.
And people of Israel understand that what a great soul and spirit and man argue, and we only want to release and to tell the people you already free. Don't let them sell you that you're not free or you need freedom. You already free. They
You just
just
to grasp it and live it
yes,
and not
yes,
accept anything other than that. And one final point, Guy, I just wanted to make, I didn't make it earlier.
please.
When I talk about um, Zionism and ultra Zionism, which are the real extremists, then I'm talking about a political philosophy.
Correct.
I'm talking about the way a political philosophy has been created and again hijacked. You know, someone that believes in Zionism, which they have every right to do, does not mean they're an ultra Zionist extremist where there's no thought for anyone else except their own goals. There are people that believe in Zionism that also believe in some kind of justice for Palestinians. They're not mutually exclusive because, you know, Israel is where it is now. It's no good trying to roll it back and say, oh, we must go back to how, you know, before the Israeli state was created. It exists. So there has to become harmony, everybody, to live together in that area. The point is, the elite running Israel doesn't want that. And it uses, again, it equates Zionism and criticism of the extremes of Zionism with anti Semitism. And they're not the same thing. This is why so many Jewish people around the world criticize Zionism or criticize the extremes of Zionism, because it's not anything to do with a label, it's to do with basic justice. And therefore, people should not fall for the hoax, the scam that tries to paint me as an anti-Semite. I haven't got a racist cell in my body. I mean, my philosophy on life, that we are all one consciousness having a different experience, is the ultimate non-racist philosophy, because I'm saying that what we call race is just an experience. It's not who we are. But they're trying to equate my criticism of Zionism, its extremes of Zionism, and the abuse of Palestinians, and of the extremes of the Israeli government, with being racist or anti-Semitic against all Jewish people and all Israelis. That's absolutely what they want people to believe. And the reason they want to do that is if they can equate what I'm saying in that area, and so many other areas as well, that have nothing to do with Israel, they can silence everything that I say on the basis of misrepresenting me as a person and what I'm saying. Don't fall for it, because that's all part of the divide and rule. Don't listen to that Ike, he's an anti-Semite. No, I'm not. I mean, I think discrimination on the basis of anything is insane. It's childlike. But that doesn't mean that people who act in extreme, unjust, violent ways shouldn't be criticized for it and shouldn't be allowed to hide behind the anti-Semitism protection racket to stop legitimate exposure and legitimate criticism. And as these protection racket organizations, by the way, Guy, have found around the world, they can hurl all the abuse they like at me. Don't matter. Won't make any difference to me. The more abuse that they hurl at me, the more they misrepresent me. Yeah. The louder I'll speak and the louder I'll shout. So I'm going nowhere, much as they'd like me to.
This is why I wanted so much to do this interview with you, to show your real face to the people, Israeli people, and to understand what a great family we have over Israel. You understand? Because I see you as one of us, not less than anybody here inside Israel, because you love people. So this is what we are here.
Every person on this earth is one of us. Yes. And if we start from that premise, then we might have a chance of arresting this incessant divide and rule that's allowing the few to control everyone else. Because without that, they couldn't do it.
One question, David, please. Do you have in England also something that called insult of working of state? A law against this? Like you insult a worker of the state?
Well, it's kind of moving that way. I mean, we don't quite have that yet, but we do you know the whole incessant what I call totalitarian tiptoe is getting more and more extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, there's an agenda for the world whereby every country, well, actually they want an end to countries, but every country would be run the same and would be subject to the same laws. That's what this global society is about. So every country is moving in that direction, but some are doing it quicker than others. I mean, if you live in China, for instance, because you have a openly totalitarian government, they can push this on quicker than the West. But the West is going that way too, as fast as it can, but obviously not as quick as China, because it doesn't have that totality. Because the West has got to see, at least it's got to pay some lip service to the fact, oh, we're a democracy and we're a free country, because otherwise people would realize that it's not. But everything's moving that way, and there are in some countries now. Yeah, you raise a good point, where you can't insult somebody from the state, and insult them means criticizing them, and that's where we're going.
Yeah.
You know, we just had a law passed in Vietnam where you can't criticize the government on the internet. I mean, what the hell's that all about? Well, I'll tell you what it's all about. That's how it's meant to be everywhere. This is where we're going, and we need to wake up to it, and bloody fast.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really want to thank you very, very much, my dear friend. And I'm sure we're going to do shows like this more to Israeli people.
I hope so. I hope so, because, you know, if you're going to keep a group of people in fear, then those you demonize, you have to keep away from those you want to fear them, because then they realize, actually, it's nothing like we were told. No, nothing like. So there's the question.
Yes.
If I'm nothing like, and saying nothing like, the elite claim I am, and blatantly that's the case, then why are they saying it? They're saying it because they don't want you to hear it. Well, now you have. So we've made a start. And Guy, you know, thanks for the opportunity. I'm very, very grateful for it.
Well, this is what friends are for. Okay, so I thank you for all, and all the Israeli people. Thank you again for your time and what you are doing all over those years, and keep on doing it. And of course, we're gonna be in contact.
Okay, mate. Please, people of Israel, let's all come together. Put the labels down, and we'll sort this out quicker than we can imagine if we would do that.
I send you shalom from Israel, dear David.
Thanks, mate. All the best. Bye.
Bye-bye.